Now we discussed the auto boxing and unboxing in Java, and now we already discussed the performance impact of the auto boxing unboxing in Java. So now we already discussed the auto boxing and unboxing in Java, and now we already have seen the execution time impact on simple predicate versus the primitive predicate. So now we will discuss the predicate and all the other type of predicates in this session. So there are first four type of predicates, single input predicates. So single input means these predicate take only one input. And so first is the simple predicate. So predicate that takes t type of input. T means object type of input and return boolean. Second is the int predicate that take int as a input and return boolean. Third is the long predicate that takes long as a primitive type as a input and return boolean. And fourth is the double predicate that takes double as a primitive input and return boolean. And there is one more predicate, that is by predicate, that takes two input t and k, two both are object or wrapper classes, and return boolean. Now we will see how we can implement these all the predicate in an example. So I have created four predicate functions here. We already discussed the simple predicate, so I am skipping that simple predicate part here. So first is the int predicate. So for the int predicate, we need to create a reference or get an object for the int predicate class, and the implementation is same as the simple predicate, like first bracket where we can pass the input, and input is a int, and here I am implementing the int predicate implementation, that is x should be greater than 5. So to call this int predicate and the test, we need to use the test method. So I am calling int predicate dot test with this 10 input, so this will give me the output as a boolean. Same for the long predicate, I need to use the long predicate, and the rest of the implementation is same. Same for the double predicate. So for to double, we need to implement the double predicate. The input will be here x, that x is basically a double as a primitive type, and the rest of the implementation is same, like we are calling test on this double predicate, and that is returning the boolean. Now the next is the by predicate. By predicate where we can pass two input. So here I am specifying the two input of both are integer, this is the first and this is the second input, and here I am taking x and y both are integer. I am just checking the greater than. So if x is greater than y, then this predicate will return true. So I'm passing 10 and 15 and calling the test function, so this will return a false. Let's run this function. Yeah, so first is giving the int predicate is giving the true because we are passing 10 and 10 is more than or greater than 5. Again this 10 is greater than 5, so long predicate result is also true. And for double predicate, again I am passing same input 10, and 10 is greater than 5, I am getting true here. Now the second is the supplier. So there are five functional interfaces related to supplier. So first is the simple supplier, so where all these functional interfaces are related to supplier. So all the supplier will not take any input, or do not take any input. So supplier only return. So first is the default supplier that return r means any type of data type. Second is the int supplier that return int. Third is the boolean supplier that return boolean as a primitive. And fourth is the long supplier that return long. And fifth is the double supplier that return double. So these second, third, and fourth and fifth all are returning the primitive data type, not the wrapper classes here. Now let's discuss the supplier with the implementation. So I have created four supplier function: int, long, double, or boolean supplier. So we already discussed the simple supplier, so I'm skipping the implementation of that part. So first is the int supplier. For that we need to call this int supplier class object, and the implementation is same. So first bracket is for input, so supplier do not take any input, so that is empty. Now the supplier will return the 5 as a int data type, not a wrapper, as a wrapper class. So to call this int supplier, we need to call this get as a int function. and that will return int value in data type. Second is the long supplier. So the long supplier is basically to for long supplier we need to call the long supplier class, and same supplier not taking an input, so first bracket is empty, and here I am returning the 5l. L is for the long value. So to call this function we need to call this method get as a long, that will return the output in the long primitive data type. Now next is the double supplier. So for double supplier we need to call this class double supplier, and that is returning 5.0. 5.0 means the double primitive type, and double supplier dot get as double, so we need to call this method get as a double, and that will return the output in the double primitive type. The next is the boolean supplier. So this boolean supplier is for boolean primitive data type. So to call for this we need to call this boolean supplier class, and here this is the implementation, we are returning false. So to call this boolean supplier we need to call this method get as a boolean, that is returning the result as a boolean primitive type. So here we are getting the result. Let's run this supplier functions. So first is the int supplier, that is returning 5 because we are returning 5. Second is same long supplier 5. Third is again double supplier, that is returning 5. And the fourth one is a boolean supplier, we are returning false. So here we are getting false. So the next is the consumer. So there are two type of consumer. The first consumer that takes only one input, and for that kind of that consumer that takes only one input, there are four type of consumer. One is consumer, second is end consumer, third is long consumer, and fourth is double consumer. So this default consumer takes t type of input and return nothing. So all this consumer do not return anything, only they takes input. And this input consumer take in int as an input and return nothing. This long consumer take long as an input and return nothing. This double consumer take double as an input and return nothing. Now the second type of consumer are the basically that takes two input. So first is the buy consumer. So buy consumer is the default type of the consumer. So because this is taking t and k any type of two input and return nothing. Second is the object int consumer. So object int consumer at name says like first input is the t, any kind of object, and second is the int. So second is basically a int primitive type and return nothing. Object long consumer. So again first is the t, any kind of object, and second is the long, that is primitive data type. Now the fourth one is the object double consumer. So again first is the t, that is any kind of object, and double second is the double, that is double primitive type. Let's see how we can use this function in our example. So I have created the implementation of each consumer type. So I'm skipping the simple consumer type because we already discussed in previous example. First is the int consumer. So it's like a same as we discussed in the predicate primitive predicates or primitive supplier. So int consumer is the class, and that is taking the input, and that input is a int type, and here we are printing only, and whatever we are passing that again that is a int parameter. So second is the long consumer. So to call this long consumer, so we are passing x, and this 5l is the long primitive. So we are passing long primitive here, and that is taking long primitive here. Now next is the double consumer. So for double consumer we need to implement this class double consumer, and this will take the input as a double primitive. So here we are passing 5.0, and this x is a double primitive. Now next examples are the related to the buy consumers. So buy consumer where we can pass two inputs. So first buy consumer is taking two input integer, and here I am taking x comma y as a reference, and here I am printing the sum of the x comma y. So if I am passing 5 and 15, this will print 20. Second is the buy object int consumer. So in the buy object int consumer means first input is the object, second is the int. So we need to specify only one type of input here. So second is already clear, like that is int. So here I am taking x and y. So x is string because here we specified string, and y is the int. So here So because first parameter is string and second is int, so here concatenation will happen. So if we are passing v and 15, this will return v15 as a output. Now the next is by object long consumer. So here again I am passing string as the first object type and second is the long. So x is the string and y is the long as a data primitive type. And here again x is string, so that's why this plus will work like a concatenation. So I'm passing v and 15l, so we will get v15. Now the next and last one is the by object double consumer. Again, so this object we have to specify here, that is string, and second parameter is clear, already clear with the double. So x is the string and y is the double as a data primitive, double primitive. So here concatenation is happening. So we are passing v and 15. So here we will get concatenation of both the value. Let's run this consumer functions. So first is the int consumer, long consumer, and double consumer. All are returning the 5. This is 5, this is 5, this is 5.0. Now what about the by function, by consumer? So here by consumer, first one is returning 20, second is returning v15, third v by object long consumer, that is also returning v15, and the last one is returning v15.0 because this 15.0 is the double.